If you have to remind someone you're important, you've already lost what truly matters. The words drifted softly from an elderly customer seated alone near the window, almost swallowed by the quiet jazz flowing through Sterling House, the most exclusive steakhouse in downtown Charlotte. No one seemed to notice except Maya Brooks. She carried a polished silver tray balanced effortlessly on one hand, her black apron pressed neatly against her white shirt, her calm smile never wavering despite the dinner rush surrounding her. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath warm chandeliers. Conversations blended with the gentle clink of silverware, and every table seemed wrapped in effortless luxury. Maya moved between them like she belonged to the rhythm itself, remembering names, favorite drinks, and little details most people overlooked. To her, every guest deserved dignity, whether they tipped $20 or none at all. Across the room, however, another kind of presence commanded attention. Richard Coleman entered without speaking, yet every manager immediately straightened their posture. The white CEO of Coleman Hospitality owned not only Sterling House, but more than 60 luxury restaurants across the Southeast. His tailored navy suit looked as sharp as the expression that rarely softened. Employees lowered their voices whenever he walked past because everyone knew Richard believed excellence came from pressure, not compassion. His reputation had become legendary. Investors admired his results. Employees feared his inspections. Tonight was especially important. In less than 12 hours, Richard expected to finalize the largest corporate acquisition in his company's history, a deal that would place Coleman Hospitality among the nation's elite. Nothing, in his mind, was allowed to interfere with perfection. Maya noticed an elderly woman sitting quietly at a corner table, dressed simply in a beige cardigan that seemed strangely modest compared to everyone else in the dining room. Several servers hurried past without making eye contact, assuming she would order little and tip even less. Maya approached anyway with the same gentle professionalism she offered every guest. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Sterling House. May I bring you some water while you look over the menu?" The woman's tired eyes brightened with genuine surprise. "Thank you, dear. Sparkling water would be lovely." Maya nodded warmly before returning moments later, placing the glass carefully on the table without rushing away. She noticed the woman studying the menu a little longer than everyone else, so she patiently explained each special with quiet kindness instead of rehearsed salesmanship. From the mezzanine overlooking the dining room, Richard watched the exchange with growing irritation. His eyes shifted toward the waiting list displayed on the hostess's tablet. Several wealthy clients had already arrived and were standing near the entrance. Every occupied seat represented lost revenue if service slowed, and in Richard's world, numbers mattered more than intentions. He descended the staircase with measured steps, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. Managers instinctively followed a few feet behind him. Maya had just finished refilling the elderly woman's water when Richard stopped beside the table. The temperature of the room seemed to drop without a single degree changing. Conversations faded. Nearby servers exchanged anxious glances. Richard looked first at the nearly untouched menu, then at Maya, and finally toward the crowded entrance where impatient VIP guests waited to be seated. His jaw tightened. "Miss Brooks," he said in a voice calm enough to be more intimidating than anger itself, "I believe I assigned you to serve profitable tables tonight." Maya slowly turned toward him, her expression respectful but steady, completely unaware that within the next few minutes, one decision would erase her place inside this restaurant forever, while quietly opening a door that neither of them could yet imagine. Maya met Richard's gaze without lowering her eyes, although every instinct told her to disappear into the polished marble floor beneath her feet. "Yes, sir," she answered calmly. Mrs. Turner had been waiting for several minutes. "I wanted to make sure she was comfortable." Richard glanced briefly toward the elderly woman, whose modest clothes made her almost invisible among the tailored suits and designer dresses filling the dining room. His expression remained unreadable. "Comfort does not pay salaries," he replied. "Those guests at the entrance do." Several managers shifted uneasily, pretending to study reservation tablets instead of watching the exchange unfold. Maya nodded once. "I understand, sir. I will be with them immediately." Before she could step away, the elderly woman gently placed her menu on the table. "Young lady," she said with a warm smile, "thank you for treating me like I mattered." Maya returned the smile naturally. "Everyone matters, ma'am. I hope you enjoy your evening." Those simple words lingered in the silence far longer than anyone expected. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. To him, the restaurant was a machine built on precision, efficiency, and measurable performance. Kindness was appreciated only when it increased customer satisfaction scores. Time spent with a guest who ordered little represented lost opportunity. He watched Maya hurry toward the waiting guests with graceful professionalism, greeting each family with genuine warmth despite the uncomfortable conversation that had just taken place. She never mentioned what had happened. She simply continued working as though dignity required no audience. Few people inside Sterling House knew anything about Maya beyond the name stitched neatly above her apron pocket. They did not know she began every morning before sunrise, helping her mother, Evelyn Brooks, prepare for dialysis appointments twice each week. They did not know Maya spent her afternoons attending executive leadership courses she had earned through scholarships, while working evenings to cover medical bills that insurance never completely paid. They certainly did not know that before joining Sterling House 18 months earlier, she had quietly helped restructure operations for a struggling nonprofit community kitchen, increasing donations and reducing waste so successfully that several local business leaders had noticed her reports. Maya never mentioned those accomplishments because she believed character introduced itself long before resumes ever did. Her coworkers admired her because she listened more than she spoke. New employees often found handwritten notes tucked beside their lockers wishing them confidence on their first shift. When dishwashers fell behind, Maya rolled up her sleeves without being asked. When the hostess became overwhelmed, Maya greeted arriving families with the same calm smile she carried through every challenge. She never behaved as though any task was beneath her. Ironically, that quiet humility was exactly what caused many executives to overlook her completely. Richard returned to the mezzanine overlooking the restaurant, reviewing financial projections on his tablet while occasionally scanning the dining room below. Every chart pointed toward tomorrow's historic acquisition. Investors expected aggressive expansion. Board members expected record profits. Richard expected absolute control. As dessert service began, a young busser accidentally brushed against Maya while carrying a stack of polished plates. One dessert fork slipped onto the carpet with a soft metallic sound. Before the nervous teenager could apologize, Maya bent down, picked it up carefully, and whispered, "Take a deep breath. We all have first days." The young employee exhaled with visible relief before hurrying toward the kitchen. From above, Richard witnessed the interaction. Instead of seeing leadership, he saw another interruption, another unnecessary delay, another employee allowing emotion to replace efficiency. He closed his tablet slowly, his reflection faintly visible in the dark glass overlooking the city lights. Down below, Maya continued serving every table with the same steady kindness, unaware that someone had already decided her greatest strength was the very reason she no longer belonged inside his company. The dinner rush reached its peak just after 7:30. Every table was filled, the waiting list stretched across two digital screens near the entrance, and conversations echoed beneath the sparkling chandeliers like the steady hum of a perfectly tuned orchestra. Maya moved quickly but never appeared rushed. She greeted arriving guests by name whenever she could, remembered dietary restrictions without checking her notebook, and somehow found time to reassure a nervous young couple celebrating their first anniversary that the kitchen would prepare something special. Across the room, the elderly woman remained quietly seated in the corner, occasionally watching Maya with thoughtful eyes instead of focusing on the elegant meal placed before her. Richard noticed the glance, but dismissed it as meaningless. His attention was fixed on tomorrow morning. At 9 o'clock sharp, Coleman Hospitality's board would gather at headquarters to finalize the acquisition that had consumed nearly a year of negotiations. Investors from New York would join by video conference. Financial analysts expected headlines before lunchtime. Richard intended to stand before the board as the executive who had transformed a regional restaurant chain into a national luxury brand. Nothing could distract from that objective. His phone vibrated softly. A message from the chief financial officer confirmed that every board member had already arrived in Charlotte for the morning meeting. Richard allowed himself the faintest smile before sliding the phone back into his pocket. Success had always rewarded discipline. At least that was what he believed. Near the entrance, one of the hostesses approached Maya with concern. "Table 12 has been waiting almost 20 minutes for dessert," she whispered. Maya nodded immediately. "I will check with the pastry kitchen." She walked through the service corridor, thanked the overwhelmed pastry chef for working overtime, and personally carried the desserts back into the dining room rather than asking someone else. Along the way, she noticed the elderly woman carefully folding her napkin and reaching for her purse. Maya quietly stepped beside the table. "Was everything all right this evening, ma'am?" The woman smiled gently. "Everything was wonderful, because someone remembered I was more than a reservation number." Maya laughed softly. "I hope we will have the chance to welcome you back." The woman studied her for a brief moment before asking an unexpected question. "Tell me, Maya, if you could lead a company, what would you change first?" Maya blinked with quiet surprise. It was an unusual question from a restaurant guest. She thought for only a second before answering honestly. "I would make sure every employee understood why their work mattered. People who feel respected usually give their best without being forced." The woman nodded slowly, saying nothing more, yet her eyes seemed to memorize every word. Unseen by both of them, Richard had stepped out of a private dining room after finishing a meeting with several investors. From halfway across the restaurant, he caught only the final sentence. "Respect. Best." Without being forced. To him, it sounded like another conversation, keeping a server away from faster table turnover. He called over the general manager without taking his eyes off Maya. "How many times has Miss Brooks ignored priority assignments tonight?" The manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "She has received excellent guest feedback, sir." Richard's expression hardened. "That was not my question." The manager lowered his voice. "3 times, according to the floor schedule." Richard nodded once. "Calm. Precise. Final. Bring her to my office after closing. We are finished rewarding employees who confuse kindness with performance." Above the polished dining room, the lights continued reflecting across crystal glasses, but somewhere beneath that warm golden glow, tomorrow had already begun to change everything. The last guest drifted toward the exit just after 10 o'clock, leaving behind the faint aroma of roasted herbs, polished oak, and fresh coffee that always lingered after an evening of fine dining. Servers quietly reset tables while the housekeeping staff restored every chair to perfect alignment. Outside, the city lights reflected across rain-soaked sidewalks, turning downtown Charlotte into a sea of shimmering gold. Maya carefully folded her apron before walking toward the manager's office. She already knew why she had been called. Still, her heartbeat remained steady. She had learned long ago that fear rarely changed the outcome of difficult conversations. Inside the office, Richard Coleman stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, his hands resting behind his back. The framed awards lining the walls reflected years of relentless success, each one reinforcing the philosophy that had shaped his career. Results first, everything else second. The general manager quietly closed the door behind Maya before stepping back without saying a word. Richard did not immediately turn around. He continued looking at the city below as though reviewing another financial report. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know why you are here?" Maya answered honestly. "Because I did not follow the floor assignments exactly." Richard slowly faced her. "You understand the policy, yet you ignored it repeatedly." "I made a judgment call based on guest needs," Maya replied respectfully. "Every guest deserved to feel welcome." Richard gave a faint, humorless smile. "This is not a charity. It is a luxury business." Maya remained silent. Richard took a slow step closer. "You spent valuable time serving a customer who contributed almost nothing to tonight's revenue while high-value clients waited. That is poor judgment." Maya looked directly at him, her voice calm but unwavering. "I believe respect should not depend on what someone can afford to spend." The room became very quiet. Even the soft ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than before. The general manager lowered his eyes toward the polished hardwood floor. Richard studied Maya for several long seconds. He saw confidence where he expected apology. He saw composure where he expected fear. To him, that calmness felt almost like defiance. "You believe your personal values matter more than company standards," he said. Maya gently shook her head. "I believe strong companies are built by people who make every customer feel seen." Richard folded his arms. "Idealism does not build billion-dollar organizations." Maya answered with the same quiet sincerity that had guided every shift she had ever worked. Neither does treating people as if they only matter when they have money. The words settled into the room like falling snow. No one spoke. Richard's expression hardened. The decision had already been made before Maya entered the office, but hearing her challenge his philosophy removed any lingering hesitation. He reached toward the desk, picked up a neatly prepared envelope, and placed it in front of her. Effective immediately, your employment with Sterling House has ended. The general manager closed his eyes briefly, disappointed but unable to interfere. Maya looked at the envelope without touching it. For a moment, she simply breathed, the warm office lights reflecting softly against the polished wood between them. Then she lifted her eyes toward Richard. There was no anger, no pleading, only quiet disappointment. I hope tomorrow is kinder to you than today was to me, she said gently. Richard gave no response. Maya picked up the envelope, thanked the general manager for the opportunities she had been given, and walked toward the door with the same dignity she had carried onto the restaurant floor every single night. Neither she nor Richard noticed that, from the far end of the empty dining room beyond the office windows, the elderly woman in the beige cardigan had paused before leaving, watching everything in complete silence with eyes that revealed far more than either of them could possibly imagine. The cool night air wrapped around Maya as she stepped onto the sidewalk carrying nothing more than her handbag, a folded cardigan, and the envelope that officially ended 18 months of faithful work. Behind her, the golden lights of Sterling House still glowed through towering glass windows, making the restaurant appear as elegant as ever. Guests passing by would never know that inside those walls, someone had just lost the job that paid for medicine, rent, and hope. Maya paused for only a moment before taking a slow breath and walking toward the nearby light rail station. She refused to let humiliation become bitterness. Every step echoed softly across the damp pavement while traffic rolled steadily through downtown Charlotte. At almost the same moment, the elderly woman in the beige cardigan exited the restaurant through a private side entrance instead of the main lobby. Waiting beside the curb was not a taxi, but a long black sedan. A driver immediately opened the rear door with quiet respect. "Good evening, Mrs. Turner," he said. Grace Turner smiled gently before looking once more toward the direction Maya had disappeared into the night. "Did you see everything?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the driver answered carefully. Grace settled into the leather seat without another word. The sedan pulled away, disappearing into the city lights. Inside the restaurant, Richard remained in his office reviewing tomorrow's presentation. Acquisition figures, projected revenue, expansion maps, and shareholder reports covered his desk in perfect order. Yet for reasons he could not explain, Maya's final sentence continued replaying in his mind. "I hope tomorrow is kinder to you than today was to me." He dismissed the thought with a shake of his head and returned to his financial reports. Emotions belonged outside the boardroom. Results were all that mattered. Several miles away, Maya unlocked the front door of a small brick duplex where she lived with her mother. The familiar scent of chamomile tea greeted her before she even switched on the kitchen light. Evelyn Brooks looked up from her favorite armchair, concern immediately replacing her smile. "You are home early." Maya gently placed the envelope on the dining table. She did not hide the truth. "I lost my job tonight." Evelyn's shoulders fell, but instead of asking what had happened, she simply stood and embraced her daughter. The quiet hug lasted several long seconds. Finally, Evelyn stepped back and rested both hands on Maya's shoulders. "Did you lose your kindness?" she asked softly. Maya managed a faint smile. "No." "Then you did not lose the most important thing." Maya laughed quietly despite the weight pressing against her heart. Together, they shared a simple dinner of vegetable soup and warm bread while discussing practical matters. Medical appointments, monthly bills, job applications. Not once did Maya insult Richard or complain about unfairness. She simply accepted that tomorrow would require courage. After her mother went to bed, Maya sat beside the living room window overlooking the quiet neighborhood. Rain tapped gently against the glass. She opened her laptop and began updating her resume, adding nothing that exaggerated her accomplishments. As midnight approached, an unfamiliar email notification appeared across the screen. The sender displayed only 2 words. Grace Turner. Maya frowned, convinced it had to be a mistake. She clicked the message open. It contained a single sentence. Please meet me at Coleman Hospitality headquarters tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock before the board meeting. There is something important we need to discuss. Maya read the message twice, then a third time, unsure why the name felt strangely familiar. Outside, thunder rumbled quietly beyond the skyline, while downtown Charlotte settled into silence, completely unaware that when the sun rose only a few hours later, the balance of power inside one of the city's largest companies would change forever. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed clean by the night's rain, and the first rays of sunlight reflected across the glass towers of downtown Charlotte like quiet promises waiting to be fulfilled. Maya stood outside Coleman Hospitality headquarters wearing the only navy blazer she owned, one she had purchased years earlier from a thrift store before a scholarship interview. It fit perfectly because she had carefully tailored it herself. She looked at the towering building for a brief moment before taking a slow breath and stepping through the revolving doors. The marble lobby glowed beneath soft morning light, while executives carrying leather briefcases crossed the polished floor with practiced confidence. No one recognized the former waitress who had been dismissed only hours before. At exactly 8 o'clock, a receptionist approached with a welcoming smile. "Miss Brooks, Mrs. Turner is expecting you." Maya nodded politely, surprised that someone already knew her name. She followed the receptionist into a private elevator that climbed silently toward the executive floor. Every passing level displayed photographs celebrating decades of company growth, community partnerships, and leadership awards. Maya quietly observed each image, wondering why she had been invited into a world that seemed so distant from the dining room, where she had spent countless evenings serving strangers with genuine care. When the elevator doors opened, Grace Turner was already waiting near a conference room overlooking the city skyline. Gone was the modest cardigan from the restaurant. She now wore an elegant ivory suit, a simple pearl necklace, and the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that shaped thousands of lives. Maya stopped for just a second, finally recognizing the woman she had served dinner the previous evening. "Mrs. Turner," she said softly, "I did not realize." Grace smiled kindly. Most people do not. She invited Maya inside the conference room, where fresh coffee, fruit, and neatly organized folders rested on a long walnut table. The room felt peaceful despite the significance of everything about to happen. Grace poured 2 cups of coffee herself before taking a seat across from Maya. "Yesterday, I did not come to Sterling House looking for a meal," she began. "I came looking for a leader." Maya looked genuinely confused. Grace continued, her voice steady and warm. "For the past 6 months, our board has been searching for someone capable of transforming this company from a profitable business into a respected institution. We interviewed executives with impressive resumes, celebrated consultants, and experienced corporate presidents. Many knew how to increase profits. Very few understood people." Maya remained silent, listening carefully. Grace opened one of the folders and gently slid it across the table. Inside were reports Maya recognized immediately. Operational analyses, employee engagement studies, volunteer consulting recommendations she had completed years earlier for nonprofit organizations and community businesses. "We have quietly followed your work for a long time," Grace said. "Every organization you touched became stronger because people trusted you. Last night confirmed what documents alone never could." Maya looked down at the reports, astonished that someone had preserved years of work she never imagined anyone important had noticed. "But I am only—" she began before Grace gently interrupted. "Do not finish that sentence by describing your job title. Titles explain where someone works. They do not explain who someone is." A peaceful silence settled over the room as morning sunlight spread across the polished conference table. Grace finally reached into a leather portfolio and placed a single envelope in front of Maya. Unlike the envelope Maya had received the night before, this one carried the embossed seal of the board of directors. "The meeting begins in less than 1 hour," Grace said quietly. "Before the other directors arrive, there is one question only you can answer. If the board entrusts you with leading this company today, will you choose revenge or will you choose responsibility?" Maya rested her hand gently upon the unopened envelope, her reflection shimmering faintly in its polished surface, while the city awakened beyond the glass in complete silence. The conference room doors opened precisely at 9 o'clock as members of the board of directors entered one by one, exchanging quiet greetings before taking their seats around the polished walnut table. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Charlotte skyline shimmered beneath the clear morning sun, while inside, every movement carried the calm precision of people accustomed to making decisions worth billions of dollars. Richard Coleman walked into the room with absolute confidence. His acquisition presentation rested neatly inside a leather portfolio, and he acknowledged several directors with the familiar smile of a man expecting another successful morning. He barely glanced toward the head of the table because he assumed Grace Turner would begin the meeting as she always had. Instead, he stopped after only 2 steps. Someone was already seated in the chair reserved for the incoming chief executive officer. Maya Brooks looked up from a folder resting neatly before her. She wore the same navy blazer she had carefully pressed before sunrise, her posture calm, her expression composed, her confidence quiet rather than dramatic. Richard blinked once, convinced his eyes had misunderstood what they were seeing. The room became completely silent. Even the soft hum of the building's ventilation system seemed distant. Richard slowly looked toward Grace Turner, expecting an explanation. Grace remained standing beside the table with both hands gently resting on the back of her chair. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "Before we discuss today's agenda, the board has one important announcement." Several directors exchanged knowing smiles while Richard remained perfectly still. Grace continued. "After months of independent evaluation, leadership assessments, and unanimous board approval, Coleman Hospitality officially welcomes its new chief executive officer, effective immediately." She turned toward Maya with unmistakable respect. "Miss Maya Brooks." One by one, every director around the table rose to their feet. The applause that followed was warm but dignified, carrying genuine admiration rather than celebration. Richard did not move. His fingers tightened around the handle of his portfolio as the realization slowly settled over him. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a temporary assignment. The waitress he had dismissed less than 12 hours earlier now held the highest executive position in the entire company. Grace handed Maya a simple folder embossed with the company seal. "Madam Chief Executive Officer, the meeting is yours." Maya stood slowly, taking a quiet breath before looking around the room. Her eyes briefly met Richard's, but there was no triumph in her expression, only steady professionalism. "Thank you for your confidence," she said. "I accept this responsibility with humility because leadership is never about occupying the highest chair. It is about making certain every person in the building believes their work has value." Several directors nodded thoughtfully. Maya continued. "Profit allows a company to grow. Respect allows it to endure. Without both, success eventually becomes fragile." Richard lowered his eyes for the first time that morning. Her words echoed with uncomfortable familiarity. Respect should not depend on what someone can afford to spend. He remembered dismissing that belief less than a day earlier. Now the entire board listened to it as the foundation of the company's future. Grace quietly placed another folder before Richard. "Your acquisition proposal will remain on today's agenda," she said calmly, "but all executive recommendations now require the approval of the new chief executive officer." Richard looked at the document without opening it. The weight pressing against his shoulders had nothing to do with corporate authority. It came from recognizing that the person he had judged by an apron had been measured by others through character long before either of them walked into Sterling House. Morning sunlight spread across the conference table, illuminating polished wood, neatly arranged papers, and the silent distance between power earned through position and authority earned through humanity. Maya allowed the silence to settle before opening the first folder on the agenda. The room gradually returned to business, yet the atmosphere had changed in a way no financial report could measure. Every executive now watched her with quiet curiosity, eager to discover how the company's newest leader would exercise the authority that had arrived so unexpectedly. She reviewed the acquisition proposal with careful attention, asking thoughtful questions rather than rushing toward conclusions. Her voice remained calm, inviting discussion instead of demanding agreement. Directors who had spent decades in corporate leadership found themselves speaking more openly than they usually did, surprised by the respectful tone she established within minutes. Richard remained unusually quiet. He answered every question directly, but the confidence that had once filled the room now seemed replaced by careful reflection. When the formal meeting ended, directors slowly gathered their documents while congratulating Maya one final time before leaving for their next appointments. Soon only 3 people remained inside the conference room: Grace Turner, Richard Coleman, and Maya. Morning sunlight continued pouring through the expansive windows, casting long reflections across the polished walnut table. Grace quietly closed her portfolio before standing. "The two of you have something more important to discuss than quarterly projections," she said gently. "I will leave you to it." With that, she walked toward the door, pausing only long enough to offer Maya a reassuring smile before disappearing into the hallway. The room grew still again. Richard looked out across the skyline for several moments before finally speaking. "I owe you an apology." His voice carried none of the certainty it had held the previous evening. "Yesterday, I judged your value by your position. I convinced myself efficiency mattered more than dignity. I was wrong." Maya listened without interrupting. Richard slowly turned to face her. "When you left the restaurant, I believed I had protected the company's standards. Today I understand I failed to protect something much more important." His words were simple, free from excuses, and spoken with genuine humility. Maya folded her hands gently on the table. "Leadership is not measured by whether we make mistakes," she replied softly. "It is measured by what we choose after we recognize them." Richard lowered his eyes for a moment. "I expect you will ask for my resignation." Maya looked at him thoughtfully before giving a small shake of her head. "No." Richard looked up, surprised. Maya continued, "Removing people is easy. Helping them grow is much harder. I did not accept this position to prove someone else was smaller. I accepted it because this company deserves to become stronger." She reached into the folder beside her and slid a new document across the table. Richard opened it carefully. It was not a termination letter. Instead, it outlined a company-wide initiative titled Frontline Leadership Experience. Beginning immediately, every executive, including senior officers, would spend 1 full week each quarter working alongside restaurant staff, housekeeping teams, receptionists, kitchen employees, and customer service representatives. The goal was simple: experience the work before evaluating the people doing it. Richard read every page in complete silence. Finally, he looked back at Maya. "You want me to lead this program?" Maya nodded. "No one understands why it matters more than someone who has learned the lesson personally." A faint smile, humble and almost grateful, appeared on Richard's face for the first time that morning. "I will do it." Maya stood and extended her hand across the table. Richard accepted it without hesitation. There was no victory in the gesture, no humiliation, and no resentment lingering between them. Only mutual respect beginning where pride had ended. Beyond the glass walls, employees moved through another ordinary workday, completely unaware that inside the executive conference room, the future of their company had just been reshaped not by revenge, but by the quiet strength of forgiveness. 6 months passed with remarkable quietness, the kind of change that could not be measured only through quarterly reports or rising stock prices. It revealed itself in smaller moments that slowly transformed an entire company. Restaurant managers began greeting dishwashers by name before morning shifts. Executives spent time serving tables, cleaning dining rooms, preparing coffee, and listening to employees whose voices had once been overlooked. Customer satisfaction reached record highs, but what surprised shareholders even more was that employee retention climbed higher than it had in more than a decade. People stayed because they finally believed they belonged. Maya never filled the executive floor with unnecessary ceremony. Her office door remained open whenever possible, and every Friday morning she walked through different company locations without announcing her arrival. She shook hands with cooks, thanked maintenance workers, congratulated young interns, and quietly left handwritten notes recognizing acts of kindness she observed along the way. Employees gradually stopped talking about her as the new chief executive officer. They simply called her their leader. Richard embraced the frontline leadership experience with sincerity that surprised even himself. During his first week back inside Sterling House, he wore the same simple service uniform every other employee wore. He greeted arriving guests at the entrance, refilled water glasses, polished silverware, and patiently listened whenever experienced servers explained details he had never appreciated before. One afternoon, a nervous young waiter accidentally delivered the wrong appetizer to a table before quickly apologizing. Months earlier, Richard might have focused only on the mistake. Instead, he calmly helped carry the correct order to the guests and quietly reminded the young employee, "People remember how you make them feel long after they forget small errors." As soon as the words left his mouth, Richard paused. He realized he had finally begun leading the way Maya always had. On a bright autumn afternoon, Maya visited Sterling House for the first time since leaving as an employee. Nothing had been arranged for her arrival. She simply wanted lunch after meeting with community partners nearby. As she entered the restaurant, familiar aromas of fresh bread, roasted herbs, and brewed coffee welcomed her back. Some former coworkers noticed her and smiled warmly, but they continued serving guests instead of making a scene because that was exactly how she preferred it. Richard happened to be delivering coffee to a table near the windows when he looked up and saw her standing quietly in the entrance. For just a brief second, both remembered the night everything had changed. Then Richard smiled naturally, walked over, and said, "Welcome back, Miss Brooks. We are glad you are here." Maya returned the smile with the same quiet kindness she had always carried. "It is good to see everyone doing so well." Richard personally escorted her to a table near the same corner where Grace Turner had once sat unnoticed. As Maya settled into her chair, sunlight streamed gently across the polished wood, filling the room with a warm glow that felt strangely familiar. Before returning to his duties, Richard paused. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Maya looked at him with calm understanding. "For what?" Richard glanced around the dining room, where employees laughed softly while helping one another through another busy lunch service. "For teaching me that respect is not a reward people earn. It is where leadership begins." Maya looked toward the windows where the afternoon light reflected across the glass like liquid gold. She answered with the same quiet simplicity that had guided every choice she made. "Kindness is never weakness. It is the strongest decision we can make." Neither of them spoke again. The gentle sound of conversations, clinking glasses, and quiet laughter filled the restaurant as life continued without fanfare. Outside, autumn leaves drifted slowly across the sidewalk beneath a clear Carolina sky. Inside, no one noticed the silence shared between two people whose lives had changed forever. Yet in that peaceful stillness, justice needed no applause, forgiveness required no announcement, and the brightest victory belonged not to power, but to humanity.